So what did people think of the first 5 chapters?
So something I guess we talked about last time that we didn't record it was just how it was like a bunch of vignettes, and it was that was an interesting way to start the novel.
Yeah, I like that there's some points of tension arising in for like religion, and seeing some sort of battling back and forth in that, and I'm excited to see what comes in the next few chapters. Something else that I just looking, because we have to look at first people's principles of learning, and looking at it, I can already see so many that connect to the book, you know, the well-being of the self, the family, the community, having to do with that parcel of land and what's best for the community, and is that best for the self, and the mom working her busy job, is that best for her or the community, and sort of just like the points of challenge that come up there as well. So I like that there's sort of this tension building in the book right now.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting how the first kind of 3 chapters were these 3 vignettes that seemed related but could have been completely unrelated. And now as we move into the 4th and 5th chapter, they kind of culminate and come together around this woman's death. And that was kind of a really interesting thought about how these moments can bring people together. I always think funerals are like, when somebody says that they're at a funeral, to me, it's kind of this weird mix of both like a sad moment where somebody has passed, but also a very happy moment where families can come together and near strangers can come together over, you know, and reconnect people that maybe you haven't seen in a long time. And I think that's kind of where we are right now in the story, is this moment of reconnection. And I'm quite interested to see where that goes.
Yeah, I'll just point out, I think there's some opportunities for reconnection as well with like, not Willie's one of the brothers, but the other brother who lives on the island. So I agree. It's like, there's something about just the community coming together at that funeral and seeing like where the sort of loose threads are and who can be brought in, and wondering like how they'll be brought into the story.
I think so too, but when you're talking about first people's principles and themes and everything, the fact that this family comes together is still, I think it's a beautiful thing. And I think sometimes it's lacking in other cultures. It's just happens to be today, but 14 years ago my father-in-law had a heart attack and died, and my husband had to fly to Virginia for the funeral, and it was awful. It was like the worst experience ever. And it either brings people together or it rips them apart, you know. And it was interesting to see this community come together. And she was definitely Lillian was this matriarchal figure, and it's those ties that bind, that bring people together, and despite anything that they've been through, that they come together. And you would hope that that's universal, but it's not. So anyways, I like the way that the community came together, and that the mother's another matriarchal figure now, whether she fully accepts that role or not. So I thought that was interesting.
I think I mentioned this when we were doing the meeting last time that we didn't record, that the first 3 chapters, especially, like Kylie said, and Tiffany, these vignettes, we're moving through them abruptly but very fluidly, to the point that you kind of get lost. And watching Dr. Leroy Littlebear speak about Indigenous ways of knowing and the foundational basis of knowledge, that idea of how everything is in flux, I think that the book really embodies that. And even beyond the 3 chapters, when we see this male character moving across the land, and you're seeing it from the perspective of different characters, right? Like the man selling the birdhouses, and then the debate club and the raccoons. So the book is showing you movement, but through the perspectives of these different people. And then the character of this man himself, who, you know, when we're introduced to him, he's this very handsome young person. And then later on, we meet him again, and he's, you know, having a lot of issues with his life and alcohol. And then now he's a handsome young person again. Like, it looks like his character is also in this state of flux that is still a question for me. I don't really understand who he is or how he is who he is. But I think, you know, as we go further into the book, it'll come to light.
Yeah, there's like a big question about his identity.
Mm-hmm.
And you can draw like so many things from that. Like, do you get your identity from that which you determine for yourself, or is it how other people see you? You know, so Lillian has seen him in two different states, assuming it's the same character. I think it is. And so like she has a certain identity for him, but everyone else is seeing him in this other way. So it's like, is your identity based on what people see on the outside or what they see of you, or is it what you create for yourself? There's a lot of unanswered questions there, I think.
So I used to work for the BC liquor store, and I worked in Wally, and there's that character, is his name like Sam or Sammy? He's kind of like a familiar kind of person to me in a way. And that's a character that I'm kind of drawn to, but he isn't really a big part of the novel yet. Yeah, a lot of regulars at the liquor store, and they're all, I guess, alcoholics. And they have definitely experienced many traumatic things in their lives that have led them to addiction. And I think that so far the book has really humanized this character.
I think names are really important, and they're going to be, like, I've read a little bit further, but naming is such a huge thing. And you know, who named you, what name was taken away, the land that you're on, absolutely everything is naming is so symbolic. And like the motorcycle guy, John, his name, Lillian's name that isn't really her name. And even the fact that in that first vignette, they don't name, I don't think they actually name Jesus, do they? They just talk about that guy. And then the male character remains nameless. So you can have thoughts and theories about him, but it's ambiguous. And the fact that Sam had another name, but that kind of thing, that's really, really important. So I'm sure that'll progress as the book goes on about what that means. And I'm just trying to think, I should have looked it up before, but John means God's gift, doesn't it? Doesn't the name John mean God's gift? I think it does.
I'm not sure.
Probably.
Well, one thing I think is kind of interesting coming out of this conversation is seeing how even if we've all read the same first 5 chapters, different parts have really stuck out, from Tiffany's experiences working at the liquor store, or to Nicole's experiences with a passing in the family, or Olivia's interest in certain genres and tropes within literature. The funeral part stuck out for me as well, because I experienced a lot of death when I was young, and so it's something I've thought about a lot, and been to many funerals. I actually, for a long time, I didn't really know the word charcuterie. I just thought it was funeral food.
Oh my gosh. That's so funny. Okay, just a comment on like that and what Nicole was saying about names. Like, I think names tie back in with identity and funerals, and funny that you bring this up. So just to share something personal, I've had 3 family members die since I've started this program, but we haven't had a funeral for any of them. And it feels very weird because it feels like there hasn't been that closure. And it's weird because it's like, you know, talking about identity, it's like, okay, well, this person is gone, but they're still here, but we haven't wrapped up their life with celebrating their death or anything along those lines. So it is, I don't know, it's just, yeah, it's interesting what people take away from this and what people take away from funerals and things.
Yeah. And the fact that Wayne didn't go, like he's the one on the island, and he wanted to grieve privately, and he was the mother's favorite, so you'd think automatically he would come, but he couldn't, you know, and he wanted to do it in his own way, you know, like all that. It's very personal, very individualized.
Yeah, totally. On like a separate note, and a separate theme that I've kind of seen come up, and I'm wondering if anybody else has noticed this, is something along the lines of like learning and education, because there's like the learning in the beginning, you know, you have to learn how to swim, and then Lillian goes to the residential school, and it's the learning that happens there. And then it's the learning from the guy on the island who says he goes there to master his martial arts. And it's just, it seems to me like there's some sort of theme along the lines of how these people are being educated on different things. Has anyone picked that up at all, or is it just me?
I think I've noticed it in terms of the language and the culture. Like when we see Maggie talking to her mom, and Lillian talks in Anishinaabe, and Maggie's like, oh, she talks with this confidence, right? And although me and my siblings know the language, we don't have that confidence. And even more so in the next generation of our family who learn the language from university, if they even decide to take that course. And like that struck a chord with me because I am a second generation Canadian, and my family speaks Burmese, and I know the language, but I can't speak it confidently. And I usually don't speak it because it's so bad. My pronunciation and things are so bad, and like my knowledge of the language is probably at a like elementary level.
Yeah.
So
which just like shows you how quickly you can lose that piece of your culture, right? It's like within one generation. I think it's in the novel that Lillian's 9 children were all could all speak the language, but not as well. And so, yeah, you're right. It's pretty like shocking how quickly that can go.
Yeah. And then like when Maggie asks about the stranger, or sorry, I think it's when Lillian says she's called someone, and Maggie's like, who have you called? And Lillian's like, oh, you wouldn't understand. It's an Anishinaabe thing. And Maggie's like, but I am Anishinaabe. So that, you know, even when you're of the same culture, that disconnect, right, of not being able to understand something that the elders do, just because you know, haven't had the same kind of education they've had, or the, like, I don't know, like the kind of life that's really integrated with the culture, like that culture is watered down.
Yeah, and Lillian totally called her out on it because she said, you're not Anishinaabe, you're First Nations, right? So it was like saying like, you're not part of this culture.
Yeah.
Sorry.
There's like an element of like, because like you are, though, but there's an element of like forgetting. It's like you're like, I don't know. There's like an element of conditioning where because you've been made to forget something, like you're kind of getting your children to forget in a way, which is an interesting thing.
Yeah, I think that's just how like
internalized racism and like being subjugated.
And I think that's probably a sentiment that a lot of Canadians could probably connect with to some degree, because very few Canadians, you know, Canadian citizens have been here for all too many generations. You know, both my grandfathers are from Europe. And a while back, I was at the Austrian country club for Krampusnacht, and I was with a friend who was born in Austria, and his partner asked, like, "Oh, like, are you German too?" And my friend was like, "No, he's just a poser, you know. Though I have the blood like lineage, I don't really have the language, and I wasn't born in Germany or around there. And so, how quickly you get cut from one culture to the other." And I know, speaking to a lot of Canadians about Canadian identity, for a lot of people, it's a really weird mixed identity, because you're often not made to feel Canadian, but you're also not made to feel of wherever your ancestors descend from. So
Mm-hmm.
It's Kyle knows this. I'm half German, and my dad is German. He's been here since 1968, but Germans don't lose their accent. So he sounds like he got off the boat yesterday. And we grew up with every German family in the Lower Mainland. We all went to German school on Saturday mornings. And in the 80s, I'm not joking, full leather regalia with the braided hair and, you know, Christmas festivals and all this kind of stuff. And those people, all of us are first generation Canadians. We all now have children. And what do? Like, what do you all send them? I sent my kids to German school for a couple of years, but it's too intense. Like, and they really have no idea why they're going, because their grandfather speaks English. He's here. My grandmother was in Germany. So if I wanted to speak to my own grandmother, I had to go to German school. But when you're here for so long, English is just so pervasive that that's what you learn and that's all you need. And I can see where the people in the novel, well, if everyone speaks English, why would you learn anything else? You have to really want that cultural experience that only comes from knowing the language, because you don't understand the songs. You don't understand the jokes. If a German ever tries to translate one of their jokes, it makes no sense unless not only do you speak the language, but you know why it's funny. And the why it's funny comes from the cultural experience. And if you're not immersed in that culture, you don't get it. So yeah, I felt a lot of connection to the kids in the story, where with the language barrier and the kind of like, well, I kind of get what you mean, but I'm going to answer you in English.
Mm-hmm. I think that you just indirectly commented on the importance of how Indigenous language was ripped away from people, and how so many of the Indigenous languages in Canada are lost now. And so it's like that lost culture, that lost connection. You know, and I think that like Olivia as well, talking about losing your language, and Kyle not speaking German, and then Nicole, you not like necessarily teaching our kids German. It's like, at least in those, there's choices in like Indigenous children being sent to residential schooling. There was no choice. You know, they were forbidden from speaking their language. And that just, I think you just showed like the importance and heaviness of that.
But that also speaks to the resilience and the strength of those communities to see that even after a systemic oppression of their cultures and languages, there's now a pretty exciting movement of restoration.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, let's hope that keeps going.
And I do think that it is that inherent will to keep the language and the culture alive and to learn as much as they can, because they realize what you lose if you don't have the language.
Mm-hmm.
Culture is very immersive, and I think without having, like, I guess that language or those things to absorb, you're not really going to keep it sustained. That makes sense. So I speak Tagalog because my grandma like raised my siblings and I, and she didn't really speak English. But if she hadn't, then I wouldn't have had that connection. But at the same time, there's also like school, and there's also like just laws and like the books that you're surrounded by that kind of dictate how you learn and what you know and how you navigate the world.
Yeah, the media.
Mm-hmm.
think there's also, like, it's interesting to see how Maggie is in this position as chief, and it's a position her husband was in and sort of died doing, and the effect that it had on Virgil too, like the absence of the father and now the absence of the mother as she tries to, you know, keep her people like happy and healthy and thriving, and she's like sacrificing her own life for that. I think that speaks a lot to the struggle as well, and the like I'm interested to see what happens if Maggie is able to balance her life, but it doesn't, like right now the other characters don't seem to be taking the same kind of initiative as her, so it doesn't feel like she has a way out. So that's an interesting way to see what life is like as well in that kind of a role.
Interesting to see if the man in the motorcycle saves her. We'll find out soon. Dun, dun, dun.
All right. It was nice talking with everybody.
Yeah.
Have a good afternoon.
Bye. Have a nice afternoon.
Bye.
See you tomorrow. Bye.